have an interesting topic today, and I feel like it's one that I've been meaning to talk about a lot because I talk to my clients about it a lot. And so I'm always like, oh, I should be talking about that. And then I, forget or pick a different topic or whatever. But this one is so good and so important. If you're here, say hi. Thank you for joining me. And I'm really excited to dive into it because I think that it's one that I would say just like doesn't get talked about enough or doesn't get talked about enough in a way that's really easy to understand and kind of easy to implement. So what I call this is why I tell my clients all the time to control the narrative, and how it's something you're probably not doing in your business right now. So we're going to talk about what that means, what it is, why you want to do it, and how you can do it in your business now. So what I see a lot in this space is that it is really, what's the word? Like vulnerability inducing to put out your own content, right? You have to, hey, Megan, thank you for joining me. Hey, Rita. You have to, hey, Jada, thank you for joining me. So you have to, like, in putting out your own content, like, really like step into a new level of vulnerability in a way, because you're kind of saying, here's what I believe, here's what I'm an expert in. Hey, Safia. And it takes a lot to kind of be able to put yourself out in that way. So like that's just step one. And then so often we're so worried about how other people are going to interpret that, what they think, are they going to understand it? And it keeps us so stuck around posting sometimes, right? Because as humans, we have this like fundamental and basic need that we want to feel deeply understood. That is like one of the most fundamental human needs, is to feel understood. Like, can I get an amen? Can I get some praise hands if you agree with that? I know it's one of my like biggest requirements, for sure. So anyway, fundamental need to feel understood, right? And so we feel that way about our content too. Like when we're putting things out, we want to be understood, and we feel like if we can't be, it feels scarier. If someone's going to misunderstand, it feels really scary. Safia says, amen, sister, right? It's so true. So true. So we hesitate a lot in putting out certain things and really like fully sharing our truth, fully stepping into it, really putting out what we think. And a lot of times we water down what we're saying, what we're putting out there, what we think, because of this fear of being misunderstood. So we kind of often take a stance like, if I can't make sure it's going to be understood, I'm not going to put it out there. If there's a chance that someone is going to misunderstand or, not fully get it or whatever, like I don't want to put it out there. So anyway, I think that just keeps us stuck so often. And what we kind of forget is that you get to control the narrative. We, the people putting out the content, get to control our own narrative, get to control what is going out there. So things that I will use as an example are like, as an example, pivoting in your business. That's something a lot of my clients do. That's something I've done. Hey, Elizabeth, thank you for joining. So that's something a lot of my clients have done. That's something I've done. Pivoting's an example. Sharing content that's like real truth kind of stuff for us is an example. But what we so often do is go, I don't want to share that because what if my audience doesn't get this? Or what if they don't know this? Or what if they make this assumption? Or like, I don't want to pivot because everyone's going to think that I'm just, like changing my mind all the time. Or I don't want to share that because people will assume this. Like, how many times have we all said that about our content in some way, shape, or form? Like, hand raised. I hear this from my clients several times a week. I can't say that because ... And almost always ... is a fear of being misunderstood. Does anybody else agree with that? Have you had that experience where you're like, well, I can't say that because, or I can't post that because? Anybody? Can you give me a little hand? Give me an emoji. Tell me what it was. Give me an example. So anyway, I hear this all the time. And what I tell my clients all the time is you control your narrative. You control the narrative. And so what I mean by you control the narrative is if you think that there's this big gap that people are going to misunderstand, it's your job to help them understand that. Hey, Melissa, yes, totally been there. Okay, so it's your job to help them understand that, right? So if you think, well, if I pivot and like, so my example was that when I started this business, I talked almost entirely about content creation. Then I developed that MSE framework, mindset, strategy, and execution. And I really pivoted more into being way more about like holistic collective coaching on mindset, strategy, and execution, and not just focusing on content, although I still coach on and talk about content all the time. Hey, Claire. And I was really worried at that time, like people wouldn't get why I was transitioning, that it wouldn't make sense, that they would think I was flaky, like all this stuff. And then I realized like I could just address that. Like I could just control the narrative around that instead of letting everybody make their assumptions, right? So if you, like in that case, I could be like, here's why I'm pivoting. Here's how content helps shape this pivot. Here is what the steps were that happened to make this my next right step. Here's my fear is that you might think I'm flaky. Here's what's actually going on. Hey, I'm actually terrified to do this and I'm doing it anyway because here's why it's important to me. Does that make sense? So instead of just being like, I'm pivoting, here it is, and then hiding behind the scenes and worrying like, are people going to make assumptions? Are they going to think I'm flaky? Are they going to think that I don't know what I'm talking about, or that content wasn't successful for me, or blah, 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 blah. I just get to tell them. I just get to keep controlling the narrative and keep going, here's what's actually true. Here's the truth for me. Here's what's real, right? Megan says that it's been speaking up about people caring about social impact. Love that, Megan. So yeah, I mean, I think that totally makes sense that that's a, vulnerable and scary thing to share because everyone has a lot of opinions on that, I imagine. But again, like we get to control the narrative. Like, hey, it's scary for me to say this because I'm worried about this, but this is what's true for me, right? And so I think that so often we're just not always filling in the gaps for our people, and then we're scared about what they're going to fill the gaps with. Well, guess what? You get to control the narrative and you get to fill the gaps for them, right? Claire says, so true. We are 100% responsible for our own communication. It can be scary what might come back for sure, but so important to speak our truth. Right, and I find so often that when you actually share the full truth and do control the narrative, that so often like you don't get a lot of bad responses. When I think you get the most negative feedback is when you're not filling the gaps for people and they're having to do it. So when you're not going, hey, I'm pivoting because of these 5 reasons and here's how I came to that conclusion and it makes sense for me because of this and da 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 da. It's hard to argue with that. Does that make sense? Like, or it's hard to make assumptions about that because I filled in all the gaps for you, right? When you're not doing that is when people will make their own assumptions, when they will fill their own gaps. So that's something that I just want you to think about when you're writing content, when you're sharing truth, or when you're holding yourself back from doing that, which is like, what am I scared of? And then how do I control the narrative around that? I'm scared people are going to think I'm flaky. Let me speak to that. Let me control that narrative. And I don't mean from a place of you will be able to control what everyone online thinks about you. But you will be able to provide them with much more context that 1 makes them feel closer to you, that 2 makes you feel better, and that 3 reminds you that if you're still misunderstood, you did what you could. Does that make sense? Claire says, I love that. This is scary for me to say, but 100%, like, we don't always have to be sharing from a place of like, I'm perfect and it's never scary and this was 1,000% the right decision and 9 times out of 10 when we do that is when we're actually boxing ourselves in or calling in that negative feedback because it's not actually true for us, right? And so again, if you're worried that there's going to be some thing created, like I had a client recently that shared like a very big emotional story that had happened in her life, and she had so many fears around like, what will people think about this, and will they make it mean this, and what about this? And we literally went through and we're like, well, let's tell them about that. Like if they're all going to assume this, let's make sure they know this. If they're going to say this, let's make sure we just control the narrative around this and that they actually know this piece, right? And I think that, online, it's a fine line between feeling like you have to over-explain yourself, but feeling like you also want to plug the gaps for your audience. So I never want you to feel like you owe everybody an explanation about everything. But on the other hand, I do want you to realize that you are so in control and so empowered around helping your audience understand your journey, helping them understand your thought process, helping them understand why you're making the decisions you're making, whether that's to pivot or share a controversial position or anything else, right? You have so much more control over that than you think you do. It is not like a post it and then hide and hope that it goes well. It's like a let me make sure I filled in the gaps for you kind of thing. People will pay attention to what you tell them is true, right? Because they're just going to believe you most of the time. But in the absence of any explanation, they're going to form their own. Does that make sense? So let's use my example of pivoting. Sorry, my hip's hurting me today, y'all. Let's use my example of pivoting, right? If I say to everyone, listen, I've been doing content for a while. I love it. I feel like it's helped my clients a lot. But the truth is, I feel like I'm missing this huge piece that would skyrocket their businesses even more. And so what I've noticed in all the work I've done in being a therapist and running my own businesses and helping others run theirs is that there are 3 key components of success, which are mindset, strategy, and execution. Content falls under strategy, so I'm still going to work on that, but I'm going to combine all these other pieces because for me, that is where I believe success lies. Blah, 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 blah. Right? Controlling the narrative. And so nobody has to form their own. Nobody's like, well, why is Lacey pivoting? I bet it's because content is not even working for her. I just told them exactly why. They're not even going to that thought process. They're not even thinking about it anymore because I gave them the reason. Does that make sense? So you don't have to control the narrative because it's like you're obligated to explain yourself to everyone. You can control it so that everyone doesn't do the automatic thing our brains do, which is fill in gaps when there are gaps. Does that make sense? Thank you, Claire. Right, so we're so conditioned to fill in gaps. So another example for me was in getting divorced. So I got divorced early or mid last year. And it was something that I knew I needed to share about, not only to my family and friends in my life, but I wanted to share it with my tribe and all of you guys too. And I could have just come out and been like, so I got divorced. That's it. But our brains are literally conditioned to find things, solve problems, make assumptions, whatever. So if I did that, everybody's brain would have immediately gone to work being like, ooh, I wonder what happened there. Is it because they cheated on each other? Is it because of her success? Is it because he doesn't like her anymore? Is it because she doesn't like him anymore? Is it because, right? I really just tried to be super honest about it and be like, here's where I'm at. Here's my side of the lens or the story or whatever, right? Not that we really have 2 different sides, but here's my view of it. Here's why this happened. Here's what's going on. Do I think that most people made anything up after that? I really don't, because I filled in the gap. I controlled the narrative. I think if I had just said, hey, I'm getting divorced, everyone's brains, not because they're bad people, but because it's how we work, would have automatically gone to work to make assumptions about that, to make meaning about that. That's what our brain does. It's like a meaning-making machine, right? So that's what I want to impart upon you when it comes to thinking about content, message online, taking a strong position, pivoting, sharing something personal in your life, whatever it is. You get to control the narrative on it. You get to fill in the gaps for people. And the more that you do that, the less that their assumptions are going to scare you. The more that you do that, the less you're going to be worried about what everyone's reaction is going to be. The more that you do that, the more you're going to feel deeply understood, which we talked about as that human need, right? So I want you to think about the next time you're putting out a post, the next time you're sharing something that feels scary, how do I control the narrative around this? Do I maybe just want to say I feel scared? Do I maybe want to say that I'm worried that I might seem flaky? Do I maybe want to provide a lot more context? Do I maybe want to fill in some of the particulars of the story? Because if you do that, your people will listen to you, they will believe you, and they will go with you. If you don't, their brains will make their own assumptions, right? So I hope this makes sense. I know this is kind of like an abstract concept, but I think it's so important, and I don't think we're talking about it enough, which is like, I think there's such a mentality in the online space that's sort of like, you either get me or you don't. If you don't, fuck you, right? And like, listen, kind of, right? So, you know, if somebody is like, oh, she's a bad person for getting divorced, like, okay, bye. But at the same time, like, I can help you understand me better and then help you make an informed decision. Like, I can help you understand the background, and then you can make an even better decision if you like me or don't like me. If I don't, you're not actually making an informed decision. Does that make sense? Melissa says, great expectation, fill in the gap and control the narrative. Excellent. It sounds like almost like a military strategy or something, doesn't it? Like, fill in the gap and control the narrative. I don't know. It sounds so intense, but it's so true. And it makes everything so easy. Like, I have, like I was saying, I hear this from clients all the time. So another client I have has changed her business a couple times. And so she's always so worried about like, well, but one time I said this. And so is that okay if I'm saying this, because I've kind of switched? And so I'm always saying to her, well, how do you control that narrative? How do you control that narrative? Oh, well, duh, I just tell them that I used to say this because this, and now I've come to this conclusion because of this, and I just get to control it, right? And it's so much more empowering, you know what I mean? When we feel like we're just sitting back, waiting for everybody to make an opinion, it's so stressful. When we get to kind of like step out there and tell our own story from like in the way that we want people to understand it and hear it, it's so much more powerful, right? Melissa says, perfect, makes so much sense. Thank you so much, girl. What was I going to say about that? Oh, like, I mean, that's really half the reason I started Happy Thoughts with Sarah, is because I knew I wanted to share about my divorce, and I knew I wanted to control the narrative around that. And so I needed a safe space to do it. And luckily that's how Happy Thoughts was born. And now we share, you know, there every week about different stuff. But the point is, it felt much more safe to me, and it continues to feel much more safe to me sharing about my divorce, sharing about my life, things like that, because I'm always providing context. I'm always filling the gaps. I'm always controlling the narrative instead of just sort of letting it drive itself. Because what's going to happen is that you're going to misunderstand me, I'm going to feel misunderstood, and then we're in a bad situation. I want to feel like I did everything I could to be understood and provide context, and then, you know, take it or leave it, right? But I never want to feel like there's all this misunderstanding swirling around my message or my story or my pivot or my divorce or any of that. I want to feel like I'm providing you with context just like I would in life, right? And I think that's such a good thing to think about, is like, I think of my tribe, think of you guys as like friends, right? And so I wouldn't just call up a friend and be like, I'm getting divorced. They're going to be like, what the actual fuck, right? Of course, I'm going to be like, here's what's going on. Here's what happened. Here's where I'm coming from. Here's what I'm experiencing, right? So you want to do that for your tribe. You want to give them that same courtesy and consideration. Again, not because you owe them an explanation, but I don't owe my friends an explanation either. But they're my friends, so I want them to have one. I want them to understand me, right? So the same is true with your content. You get to control the narrative. You get to provide that explanation. You get to fill in those gaps. And that's a positive thing that's going to make you feel way more empowered and way more in control around your story, right? The other thing I want to say about this is that this is true when it comes to sales too. This is another reason why I say this to my clients all the time. This is so true when it comes to your offers and sales. So here's what I mean by that. People will pay attention to what you tell them to pay attention to in your tribe because they trust you and they want to hear, you know, your expertise. That's why they're following you. So if you're not controlling the narrative about what they should buy and why they should buy it and why your program's amazing and which one they should purchase, they're either making up their own or they're not even listening. So they're either making up their own narrative, which I've totally had happen all the time, is like, you know, people like just assume you're full because you're not saying otherwise. Or people just assume that they're not the right fit for you, or people just assume that you don't actually have a program that's the right fit for them, or people assume that like there's not an easy way to work with. I'm just making shit up here, right? Because they're going to make assumptions when you don't control the narrative, right? Just like we talked about with the divorce thing. They'll make assumptions if you don't control the narrative, or they just won't think about it, which, you know, in the divorce setting might be cool, but when you're trying to make sales and business, it's not so cool when they're not thinking about it, right? So I want a peppermint tea kick. It's so good. I'm obsessed with it right now. It feels like drinking a candy cane. Hey, Mira. So I really, really want you to think about, not only as this applies to like scary things you want to share, vulnerable content, but 100% I want you to think about it as it applies to your sales process, right? Lacey, would you say that controlling the narrative starts with us first? Like, isn't it important for us to first control the narrative in our own minds, just thinking out loud? Let me process that. Isn't it important for us to first control the narrative in our own mind? Oh, 100%. Yeah. Like, you have to know the story that you want to tell. Like, as an example, you have to know why you're pivoting, or you have to know what led to the divorce, or you have to know why you want to say the controversial thing. So I think that's 100% true, Safia. Like, which is a great exercise in that you have to get clear before you can put it out there, and before you can control what anyone else thinks about it. Which is why there's that saying, I don't know who said it, but I've heard it a ton, which is share scars, not wounds. Like, so for me personally, I actually waited until I was like fully divorced, till like our divorce process was over, to share it, because I needed a little bit of time to create my own narrative, and to really decide, like, I mean, it's not like I had to decide what happened there. I obviously knew, but I really had to form like this is how it looked, and this is what happened, and this is like what I feel like my truth is around this. And when you're in the messy middle of something and it feels like a wound and not a scar, I mean, Lord, when I was in the divorce process, my narrative changed every day, right? And so I think that's 100% true. And I love that you brought that up, which is like, if you're having trouble figuring out how do I outwardly control the narrative, the first step is to go, but have I done my own work? Do I know what story is true for me? Do I know what I want to tell? Do I know what's going on in my own head? I mean, right? I think that's beautiful. So same is true as far as the sales process, actually, which is like, if you don't know your own sales process, you can't really control the narrative around it, right? Once you know it, it's easy to control that. It's easy to drive people to that, but you have to be the one talking about it all the time. So let me give you an example of what control the narrative looks like in terms of selling. I primarily sell one-on-one. I also do retreats. I do a super small mastermind on sales, but primarily like one-on-one and intensives, right? So the narrative I'm creating is like, I am amazing at one-on-one. One-on-one will give you bigger and better results than anything else. I believe 1,000% that getting on a discovery call with me and getting one-on-one coaching will absolutely change your life and business. I believe that you need to take the risk. I believe that you need to get on that call. I believe you need to figure out if we're a good fit, blah, 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 right? That is my narrative around it. Like, I believe in one-on-one from the bottom of my toes to the top of my head. Like, this is the thing, it's the thing, it's the thing. Right? But it's like my job to say that. It's my job to control that narrative. It's not my job to go, well, there's one-on-one coaching on my website. And then hope that everyone assumes from that, or like creates the story from that it's the best thing ever, and that it's life-changing, and that it's the best thing that they can invest in, and that they should get on a call with me, and that they want to find out if we're a good fit. Does that make sense? It's like, so often we're not controlling the own narrative around our sales process, or our even our offers. So like, for example, you know, if I like have a client who does primarily courses, So our work is to control the narrative around that in a different way, because she believes that courses are like absolutely life-changing in the thing. So it's our work to be like, cool, here's why this course is going to be the most amazing thing ever. Here's why you need to buy it. Here are the steps you need to take to buy it. Here's the gap. Oh, you might have this objection about courses. Let us tell you this. Oh, you might need us to fill in the gap around why we created this course. Let us tell you that. Oh, you might need to know what it's going to get for you and what your story is going to look like on the other side of it. Let us tell you that, right? So it's completely our job to control the narrative around our offers and around our sales process. If we're not, again, one of two things is happening. Either people aren't paying attention to it and they're not thinking about it at all, or they're making their own assumptions. Like, I'm just gonna make something up. I don't know that anybody has this assumption, mostly because I control my own narrative, but maybe people are like, Lacey's scared of courses. If I wasn't telling you all the time that I believe in one-on-one, that it's my gift, that it's what I think I'm here to do, blah, 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 it would be easy for you to make up that story. Be easy for you to be like, she's scared of one-on-one. If I didn't tell you that I personally hate participating in my own launches, it would be easy to be like, she's scared of launches. Does that make sense? We will fill in the gaps, right? And most of the time, we're not filling the gaps in the most flattering way. Like, I doubt if I wasn't constantly enforcing the narrative that I think one-on-one is the most life-changing best thing ever, that everyone that came into my group would be like, you know what I bet is true? I bet Lacey's one-on-one is the most life-changing, transformative thing ever. They probably aren't going to say that. They're just not. So it's my job to control the narrative around that, around how I want to make sales, around my program, around how I want them to get on the phone with me, how I want them to connect with me, what their next steps are, right? So I really, really, really want you to remember that, because again, it's not only important with content, it is so important with selling. It is so important with your program. Like, if you are not telling them over and over why they should buy, how they should buy, and controlling that story, you're not going to get as many sales, period. Does that make sense? Like, we are just leaving so much room for people to make their own assumptions. Like that, I was talking to one of my clients about this today, and she puts out like a ton of value and like massive content for her tribe, but she does not ask for the sale or tell them how they can buy from her nearly enough. And so we were talking about how basically, like, you know, a guy could go on 50 first dates, but if he's not asking anybody on a second date, he's probably not getting them. And like the same is true here. Like, you know, you could have the perfect thing on your website that links to a call with you, and you could have designed the perfect offer. But if you're not controlling the narrative and showing up and telling that story about why it's an amazing offer and why someone should get on the phone with you and why you want that second date, ain't nobody taking you up on it. So I want you to think about this in the same way. It's not just about selling. It's really about controlling the narrative around the sale. Like, what's the story you want them to know about your sales process? What's the story you want them to know about the transformation that's possible for them? What's the narrative around why you believe so much in your product or your service, right? So I would love to hear from you. Like, tell me, you know, just briefly or quickly, whether you're listening live right now or watching the replay, like, what is the narrative around your sales process, right? Why is your program the best? What's the story you want to tell around that? What do people need to know about that? And if that feels really, really, really hard to do, good. Now you have info. It's important to dive into that. It's important to go, oh, wow, this feels surprisingly hard to control the narrative around my sales process. Interesting. I have work to do here. Or maybe it comes out really easy, but you realize like, but I'm not really sharing this. I'm not really doing this, right? So I really want you to put that in words. What is your narrative around your sales process? I'll give you a quick example of mine again. And then I really want you to spend some time incorporating this, not just into your content, but to your sales process. Debbie says, this is good food for thought. I think I need to tweak and dive deeper into this for sure. Awesome, Debbie. Yeah, so like I would say my narrative for sure that I think I tell all the time is that I believe that one-on-one is the best way you can get support. I believe that I am a stellar one-on-one coach, and that is where my zone of genius is. I believe that you are going to get the best results from having personalization. I believe that you are going to have the best results from having someone else's hands, brain partnership in your business. And that I really, really, really believe that making that big leap to one-on-one is actually going to save you a ton of money in the process, because you're not going to waste time on like 5-step stuff or course stuff or a bunch of DIY shit that's sitting on your computer hard drive that's never getting used. Like, I think investing in one-on-one and personalization early and often is the absolute best thing that you can do for your business. And I think I am the absolute best coach for you to do that with, right? That's it. That's the whole game. It's not like some long drawn out thing, but I control the narrative around my one-on-one. Like, I say, here's why one-on-one, here's why you should invest in it, here's what's true, here's what I believe. Does that make sense? If you're not doing that, everyone's making shit up in their head or they're not thinking about it at all. Right? So people could be making up a bunch of stuff again about what mine is, but they're probably not if they watch me with any regularity, because I talk about it all the time, right? So that's something I really want you to take away from this. I want to know, what's your narrative around your sales process or your program? Why should people buy from you? Are you controlling that narrative? Are you filling the gaps in it? And then how do you do that with everything else in your business content-wise? Because when you do that, you will feel so much more in control, so much more empowered, and so much less scared to put stuff out there, because you will feel like you're coming from a place of providing them with the knowledge to understand you, right? And you'll feel so much more understood. If you're not doing that, the opportunity for misunderstanding is high, and the opportunity for you to feel misunderstood is very high. So that gets to be the shift for you. If I control the narrative, I feel empowered, I feel understood. If I fill the gaps, I feel empowered and understood. If I control the narrative around my sales process, I feel so empowered about getting people to buy, helping them see why, getting them to take an action, get on the phone, whatever. Does that make sense? So I want you to ask yourself this question often when it comes to your sales process and your content, which is, am I controlling the narrative around this? Am I filling the gaps around this? Am I controlling the narrative? Am I filling the gaps? If those two things aren't happening, it's going to be harder for you to feel understood, and it's definitely going to be harder for you to make sales. So I hope that was helpful. Oh, here we go. Sophia says, the narrative around my sales process is, I believe my zone of genius is teaching people how to connect with their market through kick-ass offers. And I believe all of your sales hinge on having a rock solid offer. And I believe that it's not that you can't sell or that business is hard, but when you're connecting and creating the right offers for your people, business becomes so much easier and fun. And I believe that I kick ass at helping people do this. So good. I love it. I just made my computer shake. I love it. So, so, so good, right? And like, I just got more sold on offers because you gave me the narrative to do that, right? And if your people look to you as an expert and believe you and trust you, they're going to get sold on the narrative that you're telling them, right? And so that's the whole thing here, is when you lead with that, like, who is not sold on offers now after hearing that, right? Claire says, would you say it's good to go live and talk about that, or is that too much, or a post better? I mean, I feel like it really should be infused into everything you're doing, if that makes sense. So I feel like when you're going live, that should be one of the things you're thinking about when you're writing a post, when you're talking to a client. It's sort of like what Safia just said. She's going to want that in a live stream when she's talking about it. She's going to want to mention that kind of stuff in a post when she's talking about it. She's going to want to mention that in a blog or whatever, but it's sort of like, kind of like let me think how I want to say this. Like every time, and I don't mean like literally every single time, but I mean like almost every time you're talking about your business, your offer, you want to ask yourself that question, like, am I controlling the narrative? Am I filling the gap? Am I telling them why they need this thing, or why this is the best thing, or why they should buy it? Like, that should start to feel like a natural part of the process, right? Claire says, I feel like I don't shout out enough about how good I am. Yeah, so that might be part of the narrative. Again, like if you're not controlling that, if you're not saying, I'm amazing at what I do, nobody's making that connection for you. Nobody's doing that for you. Does that make sense? Like it's kind of that like you have to be your own best cheerleader mentality. It's just like you are your offer in a way. So if you're not talking about why it's awesome, who's gonna, right? So I think that's such a big point is that, again, you control it. You get to kind of be the one talking about it as much as you possibly can, really. Cool. So let me know again what your narrative is. Safi, I loved yours. Debbie, I know you're going to work on yours. Claire, definitely share that more. And if you're watching the replay, I want to hear what yours is. So thank you guys so much for joining me. I hope that you have an awesome weekend and I will talk to you soon. Bye.